on April 11th, 1953, the 50th state signed on to the program, and Jane Spalding became the head of the Department of Education. 49 days later, the President of the United States at that time fired her and put Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller in as the head of the Department of Education. At his acceptance speech, which was a very famous speech, there were a room full of reporters, cameramen, and they asked him some questions. One was, Nelson, how much money did you make last year? He said $140 million, 1953. He was a grandson of one of the most prominent banking families in the world. He made $140 million. They said, how much did you pay in taxes? And he reached in his pocket and he grabbed out a penny, which at that time they were Indian head pennies, and he flicked it into the audience and he says, not one red cent. And today he would have been hammered for that being a racist statement, right? Not one red cent. And that line became famous. And they said, Nelson, if you made $140 million last year, why would you take this position? It only paid at that time, I think it was $37,000 or something, a yearly salary, as the head of the Department of Education. $37,000 was a lot of money in that time. Okay, and the average house was about $2,500. Okay, and he said, because I consider it the most important position in all of government. Hands went up, flashballs went off. They said, you mean you consider it a greater position than the President and the Vice President of the United States? And he looks at him and says, absolutely I do. Because if you give me one decade, one generation, and I'll change the minds and therefore the direction of the world. I'll change the minds and therefore the direction of the world. And he did. 8 years later, not even a decade, 8 years later, every textbook in our schools were changed to lies. Now that wasn't the first revision. Go back to 1908 when the Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve started to come into play, and things started changing back then. They changed.
Grammatical deceptions. In 1966, we lost the pound and we converted it into dollars, pounds and dollars. The pound was a weighted note on silver. It was equivalent to 1 pound of silver. So it was a monetary system that operated on actual weights of metal. Shillings and pennies and what have you, florins, whatever it was. It was all based on an amount of silver, and the pound note was a representation of 1 pound of silver. So you could take the pound note in and redeem it for 1 pound of silver. In 1966, that changed from a dollar, from a pound, to a promissory note system, like the US Federal Reserve promissory note system. But something else changed in 1966 as well. And what happened was our schools removed grammar and Latin from the schools in 1966. So prior to that, at school we learned grammar and Latin. And Latin were the roots of the English language, or many of the roots of the English language. So, and my father used to call Latin the math of English. And when, in 1966, when the school got rid of Latin and grammar out of their curriculum, my father bitterly complained to the school and said that the students will become illiterate. They won't know how to read if you take those things out of the curriculum. Well, I'm going to show you exactly what's happening. It's strange that this happened in 1966 too, when the pound went to the dollar, and grammar